Okay, remember we started off our week with the Pentateuch. Penta means 5, so it's the first 5 books of the Bible. And then so those first 5 books we know are Genesis, which is the creation, and all those stories that we learned about coming after creation through Joseph, an amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Then we go to Exodus. Exodus is the exit. When they left Egypt, they escaped slavery, and they were wandering in the desert. So Exodus is the exiting. Leviticus is the laws. Leviticus is the laws. Numbers. Numbers is the counting. So the counting of the people. When Moses took the census of the people, it's also counting the successes and the failures of them getting into the promised land. And then we have Deuteronomy, which sounds like the end. Kind of sounds like an ending sound. So Deuteronomy is the end. So that would be Moses' final words that he gives. Those ending words, the final words. So remember those 5 books in the Pentateuch. Then we talked about the historical books. The historical books is the biggest section of the Old Testament. Remember, it's talking about the kings, and it's talking about the judges and the people that were leading. So there's lots that we've read about those historical books. There are people that we learned about in the historical books, so we need to make sure we remember about the certain people that were highlighted. Today we're going to talk about wisdom and poetry books. So the wisdom and poetry books. So let's open up our textbooks.
Page 62.
Page 62. The wisdom and poetry books. The third section in the Old Testament contains the wisdom and poetry books, namely Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Wisdom, and Sirach. These books contain many different kinds of writing, a long debate, hymns used for worship, teachings about wisdom, short proverbs, and even love poetry. 2 things connect these books. First, most of them provide us with teachings about how to be a wise person. That is, how to live a good and holy life. The chosen people knew that wise people pleased God by living good and holy lives, and foolish people displeased God by living selfish and sinful lives. The second element that connects the books in this section is that they all contain passages of poetry. But the poetry in the Old Testament is different from most poetry you might know. It doesn't rhyme or have a specific rhythm to it. Hebrew poetry is written in groups of 2, sometimes 3 alternating lines. In most Bibles today, the second line is indented. The second line usually repeats the main idea from the first line using different words and images, but sometimes the second line expands the idea in the first line. Let's take a brief look at each of the wisdom and poetry books. The section begins with the book of Job. Job was a man who lost everything. Most of the book describes a long debate between Job and his friends about why his bad fortune happened. Today, people study the book of Job to understand an age-old question. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? You are probably most familiar with the book of Psalms, the hymns and prayers for God's chosen people. This book contains 150 prayers that were meant to be sung as part of Jewish worship. They cover nearly every human situation and emotion. Today you encounter the Psalms in their responsorial psalm at Mass. They are also an important part of the Liturgy of the Hours, the official prayer of the church that clergy, religious men and women, and many lay people pray each day. And there are some of the songs that we sing at Mass come from the Psalms. So some of the regular songs that we sing, not just the responsorial psalm, but sometimes we'll be singing a song that goes along with the Psalms from the Bible. The Psalms are followed by the book of Proverbs, a collection of sayings that gives advice on how to be a good and wise person. Most of these are short and one-line sayings. Next, the book of Ecclesiastes describes the unfairness of life and the things that do not bring true happiness. The writer advises us to accept both the good and the bad parts of life. It's not always going to be sunshine and roses, rainbows and unicorns. There will be sadness. There will be the opposite. Okay, we are not living in the Garden of Eden, unfortunately. So we need to accept that there will be some bad things that do happen. The Song of Solomon, sometimes called the Song of Songs, is a unique book. At first, it appears to be a collection of love poetry that celebrates the relationship between a man and a woman. Why does a book of love poetry appear in the Old Testament? For Jews, the poems symbolize the love between God and his chosen people. For Christians, this book also symbolizes the love between Christ and the church. So it's not just that romantic love. It's the love that we have, that Jesus has for the whole church, that Jesus has for you. This section concludes with the Book of Wisdom and the wisdom of Ben Sira. The Book of Wisdom teaches us that God will reward good people after death and punish evil people. For God's chosen people, the Book of Wisdom was also a reminder of their wise ancestors. Ben Sira contains the teachings of a man who lived about 150 years before Jesus was born. He gave very practical advice for living a good and holy life. Let's look at the liturgy connection, Jewish roots in the Mass. Much of our worship follows the Jewish forms of worship that Jesus and the apostles knew. At Mass, the liturgy of the word echoes the Jewish custom of reading aloud from the Hebrew scriptures in the synagogue. Jesus himself read from the book of Isaiah at a synagogue service. You can read about that in Luke chapter 4, verse 19 to 21. The liturgy of the word also includes a psalm, and the singing of psalms was part of Jewish worship. The liturgy of the Eucharist has roots in the Jewish Passover, which Jesus celebrated at the Last Supper. The prayer over the offerings, in which we thank God, is based on a Jewish form of prayer called Barakah. In this prayer, we thank God for the gifts of bread and wine that will soon become the body and blood of Christ. Of course, the very fact that we have a day set apart for worship and rest has its roots in the Jewish Sabbath. So our Sunday is the Jews celebrate on Saturday. That's their day of Sabbath. So we have some sentences that we need to fill in the blanks on about the different books of the Bibles. So as you're going through, make sure you get the actual words from what we read. So I'm going to give us a few minutes to work on that, and we're going to say goodbye to our friends at home and wish them a good day.